Senator Dastyari.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I did want to acknowledge the large presence of people from the press gallery who have come to hear my words about ISDS, and I want to thank them for making the effort. And I will confirm the rumours are true, that at 2:20 today, the rumours are true, at 2:20 today, there is going to be a pretty at 12:20 today, a pretty important announcement in the Senate chamber when Senator Fifield finally confirms rumours that he is appearing on Dancing with the Stars. Look, I don't have too much time because I believe we are limited to 12:20, so I will try and cover all the ground that I wanted to cover. I firstly want to say I do want to congratulate Senator Whish-Wilson for bringing this forward, and for also bringing this, allowing us to encouraging us to have this debate. The truth is that for something as significant as ISDS, the fact is there hasn't been all that much interest. It isn't a topic that, frankly, enough people understand or enough people have been talking about, and I think that that's unfortunate considering the significance of all of this and the impact that this can and will have. I think it's important to take a step back and see where all this came from and why it was significant in the first place. The idea behind it and the principle behind it, like a lot of principles, isn't necessarily a bad one. I slightly disagree with some of what Senator Di Natale said, though I agree with his sentiment. I don't oppose the idea that corporations and businesses do have a right to protect some of their investments, that they do have a right, especially in dealing with certain nations and third world nations and other nations that don't have the same kind of natural law or rights that we have, where you have a situation where, you know, a general's brother is suddenly going to start nationalising your business for their own gain, that in those kinds of extreme circumstances there shouldn't be some kind of an international or trade vehicle to allow businesses to be able to maintain and protect their rights and property. That, as a principle, I don't think is a bad thing. I think what's incredibly unfortunate is what's happened in the ISDS debate, and what we consistently see happen is what starts off as what can seem like a fairly reasonable principle, and that is businesses that make huge investments in other nations should have some kind of capacity to protect their investment, is overtaken and distorted to becoming a situation where big corporations are using free trade agreements to stymie or profit from what would otherwise be the democratic, reasonable and rational decisions the governments make. Yes, governments can and will from time to time be making decisions that will go against the interests of private corporations, and when they do it, and they do it in the public good, they should have a right to be able to do that. Of course, within Australian law, we believe that Australian companies, when this is happening to them, should have an opportunity for participating in that process. Why we have a parliament and places like this is so that we can have that kind of debate. What's really worrying in the ISDS debate is you can have a situation where a corporation can take on a government without having to really make the public case, without having to even debate whether or not their actions are in the public interest or public good. And more unfortunately is situations, and you're seeing this happening around the world now, where corporations are using ISDS provisions in obscure trade agreements, some of which go back 20 or 30 years, and misusing them simply to be able to give themselves a vehicle or an avenue to be able to make those kinds of claims. And this idea that there is a handful of international lawyers who are becoming very, very wealthy in this quasi-legal space, where you have a whole lot of senior lawyers, senior jurists, senior academics across the world that are really highlighting and saying this is a really big problem. It's a really big problem when a small group of people can meet in a hotel room to organise a trade, to resolve an ISDS dispute that can have a significant impact of tens, hundreds, or even billions of dollars on a national economy, for a national economy making decisions that it should be entitled to do so. Where I slightly disagree with where this legislation is at is, and I suppose probably where I disagree somewhat with Senator Whish-Wilson, who I have a lot of respect for on this issue, is the idea of prohibiting it as a rule. I don't think is the right way to go. But I think the idea of making sure it isn't part of how we engage in our own trade negotiations, I think, is something we should be very wary of. I think those in the chamber who follow this stuff closely, and there's a lot of people who follow this a lot closer than I do, can tell you about where things are at with the Trans-Pacific Partnership and whether or not there's going to be ISDS provisions within that. I think it's important to note that, and I think I congratulate the Howard government on when they negotiated the free trade agreement with the US initially, that ISDS provisions were taken out. And I understand there's a lot of pressure from a lot of corporations that it be included in future agreements. And those aren't just domestic corporations. I think it's the American companies that have been very, very big and very outspoken in their support of including ISDS, and the American government and the American Congress itself has been quite supportive. And the reason really is they've never been at the other end of it. The Americans have never been, and the American system has never really been at the other end of losing one of these big disputes. I think once that happens, and I think it's inevitable it will happen, I think the tide will start to turn. But we need to look at what's in the Australian interest and what's in our own interest here. And I think the concern is, and to use as an example, the most recent free trade agreement with South Korea. Again, as a point of principle, a free trade agreement with South Korea is a good thing. Is it going to massively change the Australian economy? No. There are larger trade deals, there are smaller trade deals, but it's not. It's something that should be welcomed. The inclusion of the ISDS provisions in it, I think, are unfortunate. And I think it's been made quite clear by the former Trade Minister at the time, Craig Emerson, and others, that it wasn't something Labor was prepared to negotiate into the agreement. We felt the agreement would have been better, and the agreement shouldn't have included those ISDS provisions. Unfortunately, the current government had a different view, had passed and did it with the ISDS. Was that reason enough as far as we were concerned to oppose the whole free trade agreement? No, but it's an unfortunate. We believe it could have been a better free trade agreement without ISDS, and we certainly would have negotiated. We would have negotiated it so that it wouldn't have been included. More specifically, though, getting to the Senator Whish-Wilson bill, is that I think it's unfortunate that a whole chunk of Australian business and the Australian community aren't really aware of just the significance that this ISDS debate can have on Australian society. And Senator Di Natale made reference to the most recent case, which is the case regarding tobacco and a obscure provision within a free trade agreement between Australia and Hong Kong that actually goes back before Hong Kong even returned to be part of China. And to be able to use that and latch on that to make an argument, against what I think was a very reasonable policy that was induced by the Labor Party is concerning, and it should be concerning. And I think that when we're seeing ISDS being used in that way, the international community has a right to be concerned. It should not be part of our free trade agreements. We should be quite outspoken in opposing it when we're looking at the TPP and other trade deals. And I note that I'm running out of time. So I will say that Senator Whish-Wilson should be congratulated for bringing this forward. I do, however, believe there are better ways of tackling the ISDS issue than through this bill. While I won't personally be supporting the bill in itself, I certainly support the sentiment that we should all be very, very concerned about what ISDS and the risks that arise from it.